Hey everybody, this past Sunday we celebrated Palm Sunday and Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And the main theme was beware of the crowd. We talked about how the crowds were worshiping Jesus, crying out Hosanna as he came into Jerusalem, and probably fully expecting him to deliver them from Roman oppression. They'd been under intense persecution, oppression for over 80 years. And you fast forward 5 days later, those same crowds are shouting, "Crucify him." And what was the gap? And several reasons for that shift, and one of them being probably unmet expectations. Jesus didn't meet their expectations to solve their physical problems. Of course, he came to deal with the deeper issue, sin, and we talked about that from 1 Corinthians 15, that Jesus came humbly, not to usurp power and to take the throne, but to sacrifice himself, and that his way was the way of the cross, a narrow way. But they expected him to take on this kind of political power, and they missed him, and we're at the same risk of missing him. Others just didn't want to be singled out, like Peter. He didn't want to stand out in the crowd and swim upstream, so to speak, and there are probably dozens of other reasons that the crowd was fickle. And the challenge to us as the church, I think, in this hour, and as I look out at what's going on around the world today, I think we're in the midst of the beginnings of a new awakening in our day among the church and the people of God in the States, and certainly I think even more broadly around the world. But I think one of the challenges for us is that we're at risk of hearing so many other voices and being influenced by so many other things that our lives end up looking like the rest of the world. And I would issue the challenge again to beware of the crowd. Beware of the crowd, the way of the crowd with regard to our personal lives and our how we do our finances and how we lead our families and how we conduct our business and how we think about education. Because there is a way of the world that can infect us and affect us, and then we just have a watered down message when our lives are incompatible with the way of Jesus. And let me just say again, the way of Jesus is narrow. The way of Jesus is the way of pain, the way of suffering, the way of the cross. And we would all like to sidestep that because we see beyond that, we see the power of resurrection. We see him triumphing over not just sin, but death. And we're in this kind of in-between, the now and the not yet, where we have access to a measure of that power. But not all of our earthly outcomes will reflect that kind of deliverance, that kind of physical deliverance. Jesus promised us, in this world, we will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So I think it's a call for all of us to examine ourselves and where are our lives incompatible with the way of Jesus. A great place to start would be the Beatitudes. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Whereas the message of the crowd is, blessed are the aggressive, those who make their own way, for they shall inherit the earth. So what does that look like in our businesses? What does that look like in our various pursuits and occupations? What does it look like to really flesh out meekness in the way of Jesus, in the way that we conduct our lives? And we could talk about within the context of our families, and the way of the crowd is to just abdicate responsibility and expect somebody else will disciple my kids. But the way of Jesus, Deuteronomy 6, is to, as we walk, as we lie down, we're speaking about these things. We're consistently forming our children in the ways of the scriptures and the ways of God, and so on and so forth. So as you continue to meet as a life group tonight, what I would love is if you guys would talk amongst yourselves, break up into some small groups or as a whole life group, and just give a good, honest look at, does my life, and we're not talking just about the spiritual components of our lives, we're talking about full integration, how we drive, how we pay taxes. Does my life reflect the way of Jesus? And if you need help, you could look at the Beatitudes in Matthew 5 or the whole Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7. You could look at the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5. These are reflections of how Jesus walks and lives. And it's my prayer that his way would permeate our lives so that our coworkers and the PTA boards and all the different spaces that we inhabit see people who are swimming upstream, who are going a different way than the way of the crowd, not just to stand out, but because that's the way Jesus is going, and they see Jesus in us. So may the water level rise in our midst, that we would be wholehearted, integrated disciples. Beware of the crowd. Instead, may we walk in the way of Jesus.